প্রিয় দর্শকবৃন্দ, ক্ষণকাল অনুষ্ঠানে আপনাদের সবাইকে শুভেচ্ছা। আজকে আমরা এমন একজন মানুষের সঙ্গে আলাপ করব যিনি কেবল 1971 সালে বাংলাদেশে মুক্তিযুদ্ধের সময় আমাদের সাথে ছিলেন না, তিনি পরবর্তীকালেও বাংলাদেশেই থেকেছেন, আছেন। তিনি আমাদের সবার প্রিয়, সবার শ্রদ্ধেয় জুলিয়ান ফ্রান্সিস। Julian, welcome to the program.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to be able to talk to you and chat about things in 1971.
I think it's very important to keep remembering, because history sometimes gets a little bit foggy and a little bit changed.
So this was like a continuing work of Oxfam, what had begun in 71 after the war had begun. So were you expecting, well, like was there a smell of something that was about to happen which you thought you maybe have to be prepared for?
Well, I was working on an Oxfam village development program in Bihar, following the Bihar famine of the late 1960s. At the beginning of March, that we heard some reports on the BBC actually of significant unrest, and I knew a lot of the Bengalis there. So I went there, and they were all in great excitement, and they said, you know, there's going to be a new country, because they had just heard the speech of Sheikh Mujib on March the 7th. So that was when I realized that something was happening, but we didn't know what was going to happen.
And did you hear about the crackdown soon after?
Oh yeah, we heard about that, and then thousands of people were coming across, and then we were asked to move to Calcutta to make sure that an extra zero hadn't been put on these figures on the telegrams.
Mm-hmm.
And we were able to pretty accurately then send further telegrams saying, well, we were at Bongan, Benapol, and 20,000, 30,000 at one place had crossed. At that time, we hadn't set up the medical students. We initially supported the work of medically trained sisters of Mother Teresa, and Mother Teresa would phone me at 6:45 every morning, and she wouldn't say, "Good morning, Julian." She would say, "God bless you, Julian," and then give me a shopping list of what medicines the sisters have asked for, which we would then supply the following day. So we were always getting a shopping list a day in advance. So that went on for maybe 3 weeks. And then we got ourselves organized with the medical students from the Calcutta medical colleges. I had to buy 125,000 sharis and lungis, and then 300,000 or more sets of children's clothing of different sizes.
So how did people cope with this kind of trauma, the refugees?
Well,
and also people working with the refugees.
Yes, people could get completely depressed or shocked, or there were one or two of the medical students who said, "I can't do this. I've seen too many people dying or very ill, and I can't manage it." We supplied, I don't now remember how many harmoniums, but about 100, and tablas. And then the doctors after that said the health of people in general had improved, and those musical instruments were far more important than multivitamin tablets and other things.
Amazing.
I didn't have a budget for musical, but I put it in the medical budget line, and I nearly got dismissed from Oxfam. And I actually got a professor's certificate, a medical professor's certificate, backing my decision to. I mean, I was only 26 years old then, so I shouldn't have been taking this decision without permission. You know, in a refugee camp surrounded by mud, or almost underwater. Then, and there was no green, golden Bangladesh to look at.
Yeah.
So this actually helped a great deal. At the same time, there were some people helping run primary schools, set up primary schools in the refugee camps. I mean, very basic, but at least keeping the children as happy as they could be.
One of the historic documents that we often discuss, particularly on a history of 71, is this Testament of 60. And we have a copy of that. Take a look at this. Testimony of 60 is very well known. So tell us a bit about it. How did it come about?
Well, it was very difficult to keep the problem of the refugees, the problem of Bangladesh, and the slaughter that was going on. It was very difficult to get the message on the front pages all the time. By September, there was a feeling within Oxfam, we have to try and get a document which will wake up the world. Now, that's a little Oxfam, very small in those days, but that perhaps we can do something. And so very quickly, the idea to collect statements from famous people as well as, you know, relief workers on the ground, so that the document could be handed over at the opening of the General Assembly of the United Nations in October. And so we collected lots of these statements from people locally in Kolkata or West Bengal. I collected the statement from Mother Teresa. So a big article written by Edward Kennedy entitled The Mosaic of Misery. Then this was published on October the 21st and then handed out to all the ambassadors at the UN, and then of course it was sent to most of the European prime ministers and presidents. And then only a week after this was published, Edward Kennedy took it to the Senate and asked for the whole document to be accepted as evidence of what was happening in West Bengal and, as it was then, East Pakistan. The Republican Party was in charge in those days. There was no objection for the whole document to be absorbed into the congressional record. It was an important part of stopping further arms supply to Pakistan.
In one of your first visits, you had a meeting with Sheikh Mujibur Rahman.
Yeah, that's right. It was about 10 days after Sheikh Mujib himself had returned. So then some High Commission and UN people said, well, you should make a courtesy call on Sheikh Mujib. And then luckily I was able to meet Tajuddin, and he facilitated that. He said, well, why had I come to see him? And I said, well, I wanted to know what a small organization like Oxfam could do with such the big problems for the rehabilitation of Bangladesh. And he took his pipe out of his mouth and pointed the stem at me, and how did you come here, young man? And I said, well, I had driven over land in the Land Rover from Kolkata. And he said, well, then you have seen more of my country than I have. I've been locked up for the last 9 months. So what does my country need? So I said I saw many completely burnt down villages, and bridges and culverts blown up, ferries sunk. And then I said, but bridges and ferries would be beyond, I thought, the capacity of Oxfam. And he said, no, ferries are and will be the lifeblood of my country. So please see whether, if you can't buy ferries, you can help repair them by, ordering spare parts and so on. So Oxfam ended up actually repairing many and actually bought three
new ferries.
Three new truck, roll on, roll off, that could work in very shallow waters. What were they going to be named of? And somebody said a boring thing, Oxfam 1, 2 and 3, and we said no. Can we think about naming them after flowers? So eventually it was agreed 3 Ks, Kostori, Kamini and Korabi.
In this work, looking back to 1972 and looking back to 2016, you have been in more or less the same sector. Do you see where are the big changes? Where are the big markers?
There are different big markers. I remember in 72 when I came, I hardly saw a woman on the street. So that has changed dramatically. Of course, in the famine of 74, people did die of starvation. Now, you can say part of that was man-made. I would say now there is no question in my mind that nobody dies of starvation because their neighbours and friends or even people they don't know will not allow them to starve. There are still seasonal ups and downs. The monga situation in the northwest has dramatically improved. It's more from government intervention than I think donor intervention, but the program, Chores Livelihoods program, and another DFID program on Shiri, on which I'm on the National Steering Committee, there have been significant improvements in nutrition and crop diversification, and then the government's safety net programs, the 100 Days program of food for work. That has had a significant effect.
You have been here as a mature adult from the 70s, and it's 2016. One of the issues that people discuss is the political journey. How do you look upon this political journey?
Well, a few years ago, when Bangladesh was 40 years old, to write something about how Bangladesh has changed or something. And when I write about the amazing progress, development, and whether you measure it by GDP or whatever, then I said, well, it probably could have been much more if there hadn't been political confrontation. So that's the sad situation, and I think everybody would agree that to have a good democracy, you need a constructive opposition in Parliament, and that hasn't been there, which is a great shame, because I think it's also a concern that there is not a younger generation coming up that could do many things,
Dealing with the world as we deal, we are in a asymmetric situation of power. Other countries, particularly donor countries or powerful countries, they often tend to dictate, and Bangladesh in a situation where it has sometimes been forced to listen or cannot do other than listen. How do you think this affects the Bangladeshi mind, or how do you look upon this as a major problem of governance?
Yeah, I can see that it is a problem, and it's more difficult to look at it from, if one is from UK, because Great Britain was exploiting this part of the world for so many years, including some of my own ancestors. I get into some arguments with other nationals who are saying, well, Bangladesh should do this or that or the other, and I often differ.
Some of the newspapers or media is also asking questions about the internal conflict that exists in Bangladesh between the hyper-wealthy and the slum dwellers, the very poor and the very rich. Does it bother you?
I think it's not particularly in Bangladesh. I mean, you see this widening of the gap between the rich and the poor in other countries, perhaps even in the UK itself. I think it's to Bangladesh's credit that they have got a sort of safety network, but if it can be implemented in a more transparent way and a fair way, then it will be very effective.
Which Bangladesh do you love? Which is your Bangladesh?
Well, I remember when I came here in 1985 to live and work, I found Bangladesh with far more religious tolerance and understanding than India. Certainly that's still overriding what I believe, and I've worked with project staff or NGO staff that have a mixture of religions as well as a mixture of education, and everyone has seemed to me to be extremely tolerant, and that's the Bangladesh I like and love.
Thank you, Julian, and I hope you become a Bangladeshi citizen too.
Well, I shall look forward to that day.
আপনারা শুনছিলেন জুলিয়ান ফ্রান্সিসের কথা। উনি বিলেতের মানুষ, থাকেন বাংলাদেশে, বাংলাদেশি নাগরিক হতে চান। আশা করি তিনি হতে পারবেন। সবাইকে ধন্যবাদ।